Not all crafts withstand the test of time. Today we're diving into plastic canvas needlepoint, a craft that rose to popularity, then faded away nearly into non-existence within just 30 years. We'll explore its history, why and when it became popular and then lost popularity. We'll uncover some vintage patterns and even try out a vintage design. I love sharing about all things vintage needlework and crafting. If you love sewing, crochet, and all things vintage, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Plastic canvas mesh first became commercially available in the early 1970s. Plastic canvas was a new take on traditional fabric canvases used in needlework. It was a somewhat moldable craft mesh that could be used in two-dimensional or three-dimensional shapes. People loved using it to create decorative items that could be used around the house especially. Soon, magazines and books showcasing plastic canvas were published and it took off in popularity. Patterns were sold for dollhouse furniture, decorative mini villages, and practical home items like coasters, and the notorious tissue box covers. By the late 90s, the hobby was practically dead. The most significant reason, in my opinion, for its decline is that the materials weren't the most durable. Plastic canvas itself could break easily, and the yarn used in the projects could become dirty or worn out over time, leading to finished pieces that really didn't hold up well. You couldn't wash them if they got dirty. I can understand why this craft is not popular today. None of that is personally appealing to me. A major motivation for me with crafting is knowing that the things that I make can be passed down. Plastic canvas doesn't last to be passed down in the same way, and spending a lot of time on something that is temporary and will just create waste isn't something that I personally run for. Not to mention that plastic canvas is much less aesthetically pleasing as other forms of needlework to me. I needed to give it a shot though to really understand what it was all about. I needed to make something of my own. I dug into the Internet Archive to find an open source pattern from the timeline of the plastic canvas heyday, and I was pleasantly surprised by what I found. There were quite a few magazines and books that included patterns. My favorites from the archive were Vanessa Ann's Plastic Canvas A to Z, published in 1991. Patterns were so beautiful and detailed in this book. Next, we have Plastic Canvas Gifts from 1999. And an honorable mention for this Dimensional Needlepoint book, published in 1984, with this absolutely adorable strawberry basket set. I very nearly chose this one, but because I have never done plastic canvas, I really wanted to try my hand at making an index card holder for recipes, because squares and rectangles. There were two patterns that I found. First was from Vanessa Ann's A to Z book, and the other was from Plastic Canvas Gifts. I chose the Plastic Canvas Gifts kitchen cottage pattern since it seemed much simpler than Vanessa Ann's. It says, "This charming little cottage is just the right size for holding recipe cards, coupons, or other assorted kitchen odds and ends." Sounds great to me. The pattern calls for 2 sheets of plastic canvas 7 count, so count is talking about the holes per inch. I picked this up from a local craft thrift store for I think 50 or 75 cents each. Buying plastic canvas from Amazon or craft stores is over $1 a piece, so this was a great deal for me. And it called for Spinrite Barella number 4 worsted weight yarn. Now, I did go looking for this just to see if I could find it at all, but I couldn't find it even on the Barella website. There are some secondhand sellers on eBay and Etsy, but I didn't take the time to find each of these specific colors that I needed. I searched my stash and found a few things that would work. I found tan, dark blue, white, and a rusty red colored yarn. The tan and red would be for the roof, the blue for the house walls, and I didn't have green, gray, or black, but I decided I could probably use some embroidery floss and double or triple it. Hopefully it would still turn out nicely, especially because those were mainly for the accents on the windows and the flower details. Once I had all of the materials ready, I really started getting excited about the project and imagining what it would be like, but as you'll see in a little bit, my enthusiasm faded. The first step was to cut the plastic canvas pieces. The pattern counts by the holes in the canvas, which was helpful, but involved a lot of counting and recounting because I made a few mistakes along the way. But once I had the main pieces cut, it was easy to use them as a template for the other pieces, knowing it had the right number of holes. The pattern called for only 2 sheets of the plastic canvas, but I used 3 sheets. I didn't focus too much on making all the pieces fit onto 2 sheets, and I think it would have been helpful if the pattern had a guide to show how to arrange your pieces on the sheets to make the best use of the materials, like how sewing patterns show how to arrange the pieces on your fabric. The cutting left quite a big mess from tidying the edges, so for anyone else who tries this, maybe lay out a towel or something to collect those tiny pieces. Here are all the pieces cut out so you can see how they will fit together. We have the base, front wall, back wall, side walls, roof base, roof front, back, sides, and edges, and the rooftop. Next, we are on to stitching by following the pattern graphs, very similarly to other needlepoint projects. This was pretty straightforward for me since I already knew how to cross stitch. The only issue I encountered at the beginning was that the yarn seemed to unwind in a few places. I learned to correct it as I went, though there are a few places on the first piece that are noticeable. The pattern on the roof of the house was pretty complex for a beginner, but I got the hang of it about halfway through. And keeping track of my stitches got easier as I went along. One thing that did not become easier or improve as I went along was the physical toll that this took on my hands and wrists and shoulders. My shoulders hurt anytime that I worked on the piece, which was odd to me since that doesn't happen for me when I do cross stitch or embroidery. My fingers were sore from holding the large yarn needle and pushing it through the plastic canvas. I did have the right size needle, but once each hole had some yarn in it, you would have to tug the needle through. Overall, I was tired with this project about halfway through, mainly because of how uncomfortable the process was on my body. I don't know if this was user error or something related to my posture, which honestly is awful, but I powered through and completed the main decoration for each side. Next was assembling by whip stitching the pieces together with yarn. This was the most difficult part, technically, since I had to sew 2 or 3 pieces together at once, working at odd angles to get the 3-dimensional shape. I was so relieved to finish this. It took me 1 whole month, and I'm estimating 15 hours to complete. At the beginning, I really thought this would be a 1-weekend project. And so here it is. I do think it is really cute. I think it worked out really nicely. But one of my major values in crafting is the output for the input, the amount of time and effort that goes in to what the final outcome is, and as well as practicality. And this honestly is not practical in any way. I don't think the output was worth my input. First, the top comes off. Very nice. But I have to sort of wiggle it in to replace it. And as someone with ADHD, I just know that this top would not be replaced anytime I used it. If I were to use this as an index card holder in my kitchen, I would pull out a recipe and it would just be left there with the top off on the counter somewhere. It's also really large for holding just index cards. I don't know if you can tell how big it is compared to my hand. I know that there are larger index cards than what I have right here. They're the bigger recipe index cards, but it just feels so much bigger than what I had imagined it to be. But another thing is that I worry that if I used it on the inside, it would snag the pieces. There wasn't any way to finish off the inside. There weren't any directions to keep everything nice and neat. Looking at all of those threads that are left inside the work, I just know that these cards would snag on these and ruin the beautiful work that I did on the front. So if I were to do this again, I would sew along the back of the roof so that it could hinge up and down. That way I wouldn't lose the roof somewhere. I would also insert some sort of fabric lining so that the cards wouldn't snag on the yarn on the inside. But even with these improvements, the work on this is not as neat as I would have hoped. There are sharp angles of the plastic that poke through, and it feels like it could collapse at any moment. I really doubt that this would last through any kind of wear and tear, especially being in a kitchen. And so I will not be using this as an index card holder for my recipes. I already have put some yarn inside of it, and I think that I will just use it to keep little yarn scraps. Despite its decline and my personal opinion about it, Plastic Canvas Needlepoint still has some internet following. I found a Facebook group of over 18,000 members, and the Plastic Canvas Reddit has only 504 members. Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. The Plastic Canvas Reddit channel has only 544 members, and the most recent post was 2 years ago. There are occasional new Pinterest posts for Plastic Canvas, and of course, a lot of awful AI generated patterns. But the majority of the pins that I saw were just from vintage magazines, things that were already made 30 or 40 years ago. I do have to say, seeing a lot of vintage magazines could just be my own personal Pinterest algorithm because it knows that I like old things. Compare that to the embroidery Reddit channel that has 936,000 members, or cross stitch with 1.1 million. Although all of these have awful AI generated images and patterns, so I guess they're all on the same level there. Plastic Canvas is now most often seen in teaching needlepoint and cross stitch to children, since the rigid structure does not require the use of a hoop or a frame. I actually have one of these for my daughter, a great way to try and teach her about needlepoint, about holding a needle and threading it through and making your ends and keeping it in place. And it's great that it has the color on it so they can just follow that pattern. And oddly to me, there is a big trend of people using plastic canvas to make handbags. Explain that. Overall, I agree with my initial thoughts that plastic canvas has many shortcomings. The pieces are not built to last. The actual making is strenuous, and the overall look leaves a lot to be desired. This is not a craft I would gravitate towards for making gifts, practical items, or even just for enjoyment. In comparison to sewing or crochet, for me at least, it really doesn't have a leg to stand on. Just as the plastic canvas crafting trends died, it will be followed by many others, like melted crayon art of the 2010s, and resin art and polymer earrings of 2020. So would I do this again? Well, yes and no. I wouldn't follow another vintage or even modern pattern, but I am really interested in other ways that this material can be used. What about using a crochet hook to draw on the canvas with chain stitches, or making custom-sized organization boxes for desks, kitchen, or the craft room? This has potential in tabletop gaming as well. To build different textured terrain squares for your Dungeons and Dragons campaign, or even 3D models for your encounters. That is for another video. For now, I am back to sewing and crochet. Would you like to try plastic canvas? Do you have any other ideas for how you would use this? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you would like to see more videos on vintage needlework, subscribe. I hope your projects are going well. Until next time, happy crafting! I would also insert. I would also insert. I said it again.